welcome everybody. We still have people coming in, but welcome to Stormwater Awareness Week 2022. And so glad that you guys are joining us. And it's been a good couple of workshops already. So hopefully this will continue that trend. And this workshop is going to be covering pollution prevention and good housekeeping training. And this is specifically refresher training for our phase 2 permits requirements on good housekeeping. So let's get started. And as Rebecca said, my name is Jonah Sonner. I'm a SciSec QSP with WGR Southwest, and I run our municipal compliance programs here. I work with I think about 15 to 20 municipalities regularly. Some of you that I work with are joining me. If you see pictures from your municipality, don't feel bad. They're just good examples and good education. So thank you for that. Yeah, I've been working here for quite a number of years, and again, work with the municipalities here. So what are we going to be talking about today in this workshop? Well, I've got a couple of little outcomes that I hope for us to achieve. We are going to be covering like I said earlier, the requirements of the phase 2 permits, good housekeeping pollution prevention training. And so a couple outcomes from that I hope to hit on: understanding a municipality's role in pollution prevention from O&M activities, operations and maintenance activities, and from our municipal facilities. I hope for us to understand which permit sections apply to our operation and maintenance staff, because I believe a lot of us are more program manager type roles. Maybe we're not so many field staff in this class today, so I'm going to be directing most of this to program managers and discussing a training program and trying to give some information and guidance on that. And then last outcome that I hope is understand where to find O&M BMPs and how to implement them. As Rebecca said, if you have a question, you can go ahead and type it to me or to her, probably better to her, in the chat, and we'll have a little bit of discussion time at the end. If something I said really didn't make sense and you just wanted a little bit more clarity on that before we move on, go ahead and reach out to Rebecca and say, hey, could you please give us some more information on this? That'd be great. So with that, I'm going to start us off kind of just refreshing us on what the permit does require. And so you'll know that as I'm giving you information, it's coming from somewhere. You have a reason for why we're talking about this. So if you want to follow along in your book, in your permit book, if you're nerdy like I am, you can find this in permit section E7, B3. That's what I'm going to be reading here from. And I believe we have quite a few non-traditional MS4s in this workshop. And so you'll want to look for your training requirements in section F5, B4. That'll be your guys' requirements. But I'm going to be reading pretty much from traditional, because I believe that's who the majority are. And if you're not from California, because we have some people from out of state, I apologize. This might just seem like gobbledygook to you, but it seems like that to us sometimes too. But anyway, so this is what the permit requires of us. Again, it's a biennial, so every 2 years, we need to provide training for appropriate employees involved in implementing pollution prevention and good housekeeping practices specified in the section E11. This training program needs to include a general stormwater education component, any new technologies, operations, or responsibilities that arise during the year, and permit requirements that apply to the staff being trained. So this is what I'm going to try and cover today, is providing a general stormwater education component. That'll be some basic review, hopefully. I will talk a little bit about a new responsibility that came up in the year for a lot of our Central Valley municipalities. But if you're a program manager, this will be a good opportunity for you to look back. Okay, what did we do through the year? Does anything change our management practices? Do I need to revise my training for next year for my staff. So that's just something you'll want to be thinking about as we go through this. And then again, permit requirements. I'm going to try to break down the sections that are applicable so we know where to look in the permit to make sure that we're covering our training requirements. Additionally, employees shall receive clear guidance on appropriate stormwater BMPs to use at municipal facilities and during typical O&M activities. That's also going to be something I'm trying to provide. We're going to go over some BMPs together, talk about some do's and don'ts of pollution prevention. Some of it will be applicable to municipal facilities. Others will be more for on the job. Things to think about. You can share this training because it will be recorded with your staff and they can get kind of a good basic component on some of these things. So again, part A, it's for pretty much for everybody. That's what your staff is going to need to know. But for program managers that are with us, you'll also want to consider these options. These are the other requirements. You need to have every 2 years an assessment of trained staff's knowledge. And I won't be doing that on some of the other trainings I've done. I've had a little quiz that we've done on Zoom. Not going to do that this time, but your homework is if you don't have your staff here with you, make a quiz for them. Write down some things like, oh, that's a good question. I'm going to ask my staff, do they know where a spill plan is? Do they know where the SWIP is? Do they know what BMPs to implement? And then make a little quiz for them and do an assessment of their knowledge so that you can revise their specific training for them in the future. Also, our contractors that are hired by the permittee need to be contractually obligated to implement BMPs as well. And so the same BMPs that your staff follow, every contract employee or contractor doing O&M or landscape maintenance or pesticide fertilizer application, they need to follow the same set of BMPs as well. And then the last one is requirement to provide oversight. And I think the goal with this is, because it kind of overlaps with another requirement, the goal for this is to provide education, make sure they understand, and we're checking in on them to make sure they're actually implementing the BMPs that they're supposed to. And so again, after this workshop, it'd be a good idea to go through, check on your training program, see if these things are being implemented. Do you contractually require your contractors to implement BMPs during their activities? All right, so moving on from that part of the permit, we're going to go to our general stormwater education component. This is Stormwater 101 because this is going to be pretty basic, hopefully for a lot of us. So what is stormwater? What are we talking about? Well, it's water that originates from precipitation and ice, snow, and hail melt. We in the Central Valley don't really know what snow is. We're more familiar with the rain that comes maybe once a year. But that's what it is. It's runoff. It can come from stuff melting. It can come from rain just running off. And that's what it does. Stormwater disperses either by soaking in the soil, ponding, evaporating, or more commonly, what we deal with is running off to a downstream location. It goes to what we call a different point source. And so maybe you know this, maybe you don't. Urban stormwater runoff is listed as a primary source of impairment because it carries pollutants. Runoff can carry and transport harmful pollutants from one area to downstream to another location. And so urban stormwater runoff is listed as a primary source of impairment for many of our rivers, lakes, and reservoirs and estuaries. And that comes from a study done a long time ago. I don't remember the exact study it was, but the point is that this has been around for a while. Pollutants have been around for a while. Urban stormwater is known to be contributor to pollutants for a while. That's why we have the Phase 2 MS4 permit to address and find ways to prevent pollutants from urban stormwater. So it can carry and transport harmful pollutants, but how does it get there? Well, it travels through the Ms4 Conveyance System. And the point with this is it travels untreated. Unless you live in an area where your storm system is connected to your sanitary sewer system and it actually does get treatment, the majority of us, it doesn't get treated. And so that's the message that we always try to preach is only rain down the drain. There's there's really nothing stopping what's going in this drain from reaching a river or receiving water. So that's the important thing to note here. It's untreated. And when I say conveyance system, it can mean pipes, it can mean inlets, basins, like a park basin, ditches. It can be, a roadside ditch or a swale or a man-made channel. And it's even the streets and gutters. So the conveyance system is anything that the municipality owns and operates. So it can be the street, the curb, the sidewalk even, a park basin, a pump station. All of that is part and makes up the conveyance system. And that's just important to note as we talk about, and if you're here for the next workshop for illicit discharges, that's just going to help us cover what constitutes a discharge to the MS4 system. It's streets, anything that the municipality owns and operates that connects to a receiving water. All right, and so what are our pollutants that we're looking at? Well, these are our common stormwater pollutants. It's sediment, solids, trash, oil and grease, pathogens and bacteria, pesticides and nutrients, and pH altering substances. And the thing is, our operations and maintenance activities can generate some, if not all, of these pollutants, right? We have sediment and solids from doing road work or maybe landscape work. Trash is just a common pollutant anywhere. Oil and grease from maybe a vehicle broke down, or if you have a shop, if you had a spill somewhere. Pathogens and bacteria is from a sanitary sewer overflow. Pesticides and nutrients from our landscaping activities. You get the idea. Municipalities can generate these pollutants just as much as anybody can. And so because we can be contributors or causes to impairments, our permit requires us to implement best management practices, or BMPs. And I'm going to define that a little bit later, what that means for our municipalities here. So,
Ghana,
yes.
We have a question for clarity. Could you define what an MS4 is, just for clarification?
Sure. Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System, MS4. Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. Phase 2 permit is the Phase 2 MS4 permit for small and large municipalities. So that could be a city, a county, even a utility district like an irrigation district or something like that. And then it could also be college, university. I believe we have even some military bases joining us. They can be an MS4 as well. So that's what we're talking about, in case that wasn't clear. All right, good question. So with the basic stormwater education component out of the way, I want to discuss briefly the sections of the permit. This can just be for note. We're not going to spend too much time on this. One of the things you want to be familiar with is spills and illicit discharge reporting, because your roads crew are probably, and your roads crew and your inspectors are probably going to be your eyes out in the field. They're going to see things firsthand, so you want to make sure they're familiar with these reporting sections. We'll cover this a little bit more in depth in our next workshop. If you're going to join us for that, that's the illicit discharge reporting workshop. But here are the permit sections that would be applicable for that is section E9 that you'll want to be familiar with. What about for our municipal facilities? Well, that section of the permit will cover our stormwater pollution prevention plans, or our SWIPs. And those are for municipal hotspots, or the facilities that the municipality owns or operates that can or have a significant contribution to pollution. So the one that you'll probably all have is going to be your corporation yard, right? Where everything is repaired, everything's fueled or stored. That's going to be your primary hotspot. There may be a few others that you have, but for most municipalities, corporation yard is going to be a hotspot, and that'll have a SWIP or another similar type document. So the point here is, do your staff know where the SWIP is? Do they know it exists? Do they know what BMPs are in there? So that's going to be something for you to do as homework. Review your SWIP for your corp yard or whatever pollution prevention document you have, and make sure your staff know where it is, know where to access that material, and know the BMPs required of that element. Finally, what a lot of what we'll be talking today comes from section E11 G, H, and J. That's for our streets, utilities, and parks maintenance groups. They get the bulk of this permit because, again, they'll be doing most of the pollutant generating activities. Section G, E11G, is storm drain maintenance for cleaning, disposal of debris that we get out of storm drains, as well as labeling and stenciling. E11H is a big section about O&M activities, operation and maintenance activities. That covers everything from road maintenance to graffiti removal and everything in between. The last one is for our parks and right-of-way maintenance crews. It's E11J, and that covers new landscaping, that covers landscape maintenance. That also covers a bulk of fertilizer and pesticide application, as well as irrigation controls and that sort of thing. So these are good things to review and good sections to look back. So write maybe these down and say, I need to go back and review these sections of the permit and make sure our program and our staff are familiar with them. For your non-traditionals, here are your sections. And for the purposes of this workshop, the two permits, or the two for traditional and non-traditional MS4s, the requirements are going to be pretty similar. If anything, for non-traditionals, you'll have less stringent requirements. So if you hear something, if you're non-traditional and you hear something that's like, I haven't heard that before, might not be applicable to you. And I tried to make those points in my talk, but if you have a question about something, we can talk about it afterwards. So anything else that's driving O&M practices or affecting our O&M practices? Well, again, I said I would talk a little bit about new management requirements in Central Valley. And so this might be familiar to you. We have what's called the Pyrethroid Management Programs. That's been a new program in the Central Valley. And this is, if you're not familiar with pyrethroids, that's a group of pesticides, a group of insecticides specifically, that are becoming more, what's the word I'm looking for here? They're kind of taking over as the pollutant of concern for a lot of receiving waters in the Central Valley. Their toxicity is building up, and they're being very widely used, not just by municipalities, but by consumers. They're one of the pyrethroids, which is permethrin. It's one of the most common store-bought pesticides right now. So there's a very high contribution to receiving waters from pyrethroids. And so this is the first step to try and reduce reliance on those pesticides. So the thing to note here, a lot of the requirements from this are very similar to this permit section E11J that I just referenced for our landscape maintenance program. And I'll just quickly kind of hit on some of these ideas in case you're not familiar with it. The main point is to reduce reliance on pyrethroids, but also other pesticides in general that threaten water quality. We do that by adopting and implementing policies and procedure to minimize the use of pesticides that threaten water quality. And that's in our operations, so like doing landscape maintenance, and that's also on our property in buildings and parks and that sort of thing. The primary way we do that is developing and implementing an integrated pest management, or IPM, policy that our staff, our contractors will need to follow. And the basic goal of that program, again, is reducing reliance. It's using chemicals as a last resort, and using mechanical controls, using cultural, biological controls, reaching for other controls first, and only targeting pests when there's actually an actual pest problem. And that does follow for pesticides, insecticides, as well as herbicides. They kind of get bunched into an integrated pest management program together. The third thing, which is new, is supporting the pollution prevention through the pesticide regulatory process. And if you're not familiar with this, this is the goal of this is to be involved in the pesticide registration process providing comments to DPR or the US EPA as they consider registering or deregistering pesticides for sale or use or restricted use. And so as we see things come up that could potentially affect urban water quality, this is asking us to step in there and say, hey, we as a city or a county or an MS4 would like to see you deregister this or address water quality concerns with this pesticide. So this is hopefully done as a collaborative approach where we work with a group like Casca, but it's not really clear what the end goal of this is. We'll see more on this topic in the next couple of years. So, all right, enough about that. Let's get into talking about best management practices. That's what we're here for. That's what we're going to talk about. I got a couple of scenarios that we're going to look at, some pictures here, because for any job, we really need to do an assessment of its pollution prevention potential, or I'm sorry, its pollutant potential. And so the way I did it, I have a little acrostic for you, WIC, W-I-C-K, WIC. Now, why did I pick WIC as the acrostic? It's because I had a candle next to me and I looked and I was like, I can make something work with the name WIC. It really doesn't mean anything. It's just to help you stick it in your brain of these 4 steps. I got 4 steps for you to follow. And this is just my observations, but it really does start with an evaluation of your facility or your specific job. So the first step, W, what operations are occurring? Okay, so that's the first thing. And so we're going to look at, okay, is there fueling? Is there washing? Is there maintenance? Is there material storage? What is going on here? If it's a facility, if it's at the corporation yard, you need to know activities that happen there. And if you're on a job, if you're doing landscape maintenance, you got to know all the ins and outs and all the jobs that happen during that activity. Because we need to go to the next step, I, is there a potential for pollution from these operations? Any of the common pollutants that we saw in that list, are they going to occur on our job in this activity? And so this will make a little bit more sense when we walk through our picture here. We'll go to the next one. C, can these pollutants be transported? Okay, so is there a chance for them to be washed down the street or into the gutter or washed down into the storm drain? Or can wind carry anything off site or off of the job that I'm working on? Or is there a chance for something to easily spill and enter the Ms4 Conveyance System? Those are the other things that we'll need to identify in step 3. Step 4, okay, know where it will end up. Where's your discharge point? Are there any catch basins in your work facility? What's downstream of you? Where is this going to end up? Is this going to reach a receiving water? Does it go to the sanitary sewer system? You have to know where it's going to go. And so, like I said, we'll walk through these steps. Let me just blow up this picture a little bit here, and we'll just walk through this picture. Let's take an assessment. Let's use WIC and see what operations are occurring, what pollutants we have, and then where is this going to go? So right here, I'll give you some context for this picture. We have a water line break is what happened here. So there's a water line break, and we need to fix the potable water system here. So right off the bat, you know, we have sediment as a common pollutant. We have water because we're working on a water line. We have maybe solvents from putting the pipe back together. We have potable water, so it's clean water, but it could carry pollutants. That's a way that it could be transported. Because we have vehicle, we could have fueling, we could have something break, so we could have oil and grease or maybe diesel coming from the vehicles. There would be a need to stockpile the sediment. So, you know, there could be a lot of activities here that could generate pollutants. You know, we've listed off a few of them, and so now we need to think, okay, so what's our next step here? C, let's look. Can these pollutants be transported? Well, we said with water, right? And you can see here in the picture, you got water carrying sediment, and it's going down the street already. Yeah, there's transport of pollutants. It's going somewhere, and it's going to end up somewhere, and you can't see it, but on either end of the street, it's a short street, there's 2 catch basins. And so right then and there, you'll know, okay, it can reach a catch basin. It's pretty close to where I'm working. there's going to be water. It can at least take sediment in there. This is something that I need to address. And how are we going to address it? We got to use best management practices, right? We'll look at what we'll use to, you know, in a little bit here. But I just want you to get in your mind the evaluation of the job or a facility, the steps you need to look at. Okay, how is this going to affect stormwater quality, even if it's not raining, right? That's what we're trying to understand here. Let's look at another job. Maybe this is a little less common to you. This is trimming some bushes in the right of way, and we have some material left in the street, and you know, some leaves. It doesn't look like there's anybody actively working right there now. So let's use WIC and walk through this again. So what activities are taking place? Well, we have trimming, we have hedge trimming. So is there a pollutant that can be contributed by this? Well, yes, organic debris. And again, it's in the street. So it's located in the street. So it could end up, it could be transported, maybe not through water, but maybe through wind, into the storm drain, or it can go into the catch basin where it might not be easily taken out. So this does also have potential for pollution. We know where it's going to end up. We know it could be transported there. A car could just drive by and pick it up and take it into the drain. But other things we might not think of, hey, there might be spraying. There might be a pest problem here that we're spraying for, or we might be spraying for weeds. Somebody may have cut an irrigation line as they were trimming. It can happen. And then you might have sediment and water now mixed into that idea. So these are all things we need to take into mind as we're training our staff on pollution prevention measures, right? Hopefully you're getting that idea. So what do we do with this? What do we do with this information? Well, now we need to add in BMPs to the program, right? And thankfully, we're not left to pull these BMPs out of thin air. The permit actually requires us to follow CASCA's Municipal BMP Handbook, which, if you don't know where you can find that, you can find it online. It's a free resource you can download from CASCA's website. If you want to use an equivalent manual or a different manual, the Center for Watershed Protection, they also have a manual for BMPs. I'm not as familiar with that one, and I'm not going to reference it. I'm going to specifically reference CASCA's BMPs because that's what I'm more familiar with, but you do have a couple options, and I'm sure there's more BMP field guides that are also useful and also relevant, but those are the two that I'm most familiar with. So if you're not familiar with BMPs, you got two main types. You have structural and non-structural, and those names don't really mean everything that they talk about or everything that they could possibly describe. Structural does mean overhead coverage or secondary containment. It could mean a physical structure, but it could also be like an erosion control blanket, or it could be a rock bag, maybe something that's not actually a structure, but it's still considered in the structural BMPs. And then you'll have non-structural, which could be a sweeping regiment or an inspection regiment or a procedure. So I tend to call these BMPs physical and procedural versus structural and non-structural, but those are the more traditional categories or types. But really, when you see those two, think, okay, physical BMP, something I can feel, something I can touch. I can have something over my head. It's a roof, or it's secondary containment, or it's an inspection. It's a routine, it's a procedure. So non-structural and structural, that's what you want to think about. And the question is, how may these be implemented during O&M activities? So we're going to spend the rest of our time here walking through some do's and don'ts of pollution prevention. And I did take this from CASCA cut sheets, and I try to reference them here, but I like to call good housekeeping and pollution prevention BMPs, they're common sense BMPs. So really, this shouldn't be earth-shattering. This shouldn't be winning any awards. This is really just putting on your thinking cap, using common knowledge and common sense, and taking ownership of your job and keeping things clean. That's really all of what this boils down to. But with that said, we're going to look at some do's and don'ts of BMPs that go at municipal facilities and activities out in the field. So first one we're going to look at is vehicle and equipment operation. What are some do's that we have? Well, do as much as possible, perform vehicle and equipment maintenance and repair inside or under cover. If you have to do a repair, it's best to do it inside and under cover. Why? Well, because you eliminate stormwater from being a way that it can transport pollutants if you're doing it inside. On the bottom here, I have a couple pictures, and I know they might be small, but one is outside is an outside facility. It's dirt, so things can actually leach into the soil as well. So that's another factor to consider. But it's a maintenance truck and they do a lot of maintenance, and they didn't have a lot of BMPs during this facility or during this facility inspection. So they had some stains in the dirt, and they didn't really have spill controls, versus this one on the right here was taken indoors. They still had a spill, but at least it's indoors, it's undercover. It could be cleaned up easier, and it could be addressed a little bit easier versus the one outdoors. So do as many repairs as you can inside or undercover. The cut sheet literally says, build a permanent structure. That's their idea of a BMP. If vehicle equipment maintenance outdoors is unavoidable, do protect nearby storm drains and contain maintenance as much as possible. That's the number one thing that you can do. And really just have an idea of where that's going. Some other things: do routinely inspect stored vehicles and equipment for leaks and stains. They can come up sooner than you think. We do it here at our office. We are always looking under our cars like, hey, you got an oil leak under your car, and we have to work and clean that up over here. We try to practice what we preach. And so most corporation yards that I've been to, they have vehicle storage, they have boneyard areas. And these areas really do need to be routinely inspected for sources of leaks. And even if we do use drip pans, even if we do use absorbents, they tend to get left out and forgotten about. That's what this picture on the right is some materials that was left out. And then guess what? It rained the next day. And now you have water in your bucket with oil, or it looks like they're using some cardboard. So now that's soaked with water. Maybe some of it's soaked into the ground. Not the best BMP now, right? They initially addressed it, but they didn't clean it up. They didn't finish the job. So again, common sense, do remove drip pans and absorbents prior to wet weather. So the one on the left here, that's just a large spill, whether it was fueling or maybe something busted. This again was something that wasn't addressed and wasn't cleaned up. And this is the type of thing that we're looking for and need to be routinely inspected to make sure, hey, this gets addressed sooner rather than later before it becomes a bigger problem. I have a question here that I can see. Does the cardboard identify a secondary containment? No, absolutely not. It does not. It might be a good way to catch something in an emergency if that's all you have, but in no way, shape, or form does it identify a secondary containment. And when we look at secondary containment in a little bit here, I have an example of that. We'll talk about that in a second here. So, all right, vehicle and equipment dues. That's that. What about fueling? Do identify storm drains in or near the fueling area, because you'll want to make sure these are protected. You'll want to make sure that your guys know, hey, if a spill happens, we need to protect this drain. We need to put spill supplies around it. We need to address this. Where, if a spill happens, where is it going to go? So we need to have those identified and addressed and labeled properly. Next on that is have adequate spill kits present and clearly labeled. If your fueling area is like this one on the right here, and your spill supplies are left outdoors, you need to routinely inspect those to make sure they are in good condition. And when you do have a spill, they will not be grody and disintegrated from just being left out for a couple of years, not being needed. I've seen that happen where I've looked and checked the actual spill supplies and they are disintegrated in the bucket. So make sure that they are present, that they are restocked and clearly labeled so people know what to reach for. This is the #1 thing that when we do our kick the bucket drills for municipalities or industrial facilities, and we try to do a mock spill, the thing we ask is, hey, all right, go grab your spill kit. And most of the time, people don't know where their spill kit is, or it's not adequately stocked to address the spill. By the time they find it, the spill has reached the drain inlet. So that's going to be your best BMP, is making sure those spill kits are clearly labeled. People know how to use them, where to get them, and that they actually have good usable materials in them. Okay, some don'ts. Don't provide employees access to fueling areas without proper training on spill response protocols. The #1 thing that goes across all municipal BMP cut sheets, at least for Casca, is to have training on appropriate spill response procedures. That is literally on almost every single cut sheet, is understanding spill response. It's a big deal because in an emergency situation like that, it might not be a big deal. It might be a non-hazardous spill. But say it is a bigger deal. It is a large spill. It's a 55-gallon waste oil drum or something like that. People need to know where to go, what materials to reach for, and what procedures, who to call, those types of things. So have training on appropriate spill responses. And for this cut sheet is don't provide them access to fueling, to the fueling area unless they've been trained on appropriate spill response protocols. And then don't forget to routinely inspect, especially prior to predicted rain events, for drips and staining and spills to make sure we can clean those up. All right, moving right along. What about trash and recycling bin management? This comes from cut sheet 34 for the municipality BMPs. Okay, so do keep bins, trash bins, recycling bins covered when not in use. Inspect bins to make sure they are in good shape, free of leaks, and secure bins to ensure that only authorized personnel have access. Now, I know this might seem like a headache for everybody. People might be rolling their eyes. If you work in construction or as a construction inspector and you kind of just do both, you might be like, you might understand the joke in this, and that nobody actually does this. This is one of the least commonly implemented BMPs, at least in my experience. But in this example, for our municipal facilities, this could be very, very important. And this picture on the right here might not make any sense to you, but this is actually a transformer that is broken and is leaking. And it's not very clear in the picture, but there is a lot of liquid stains and liquid just in the bottom of this recycling can. So what happens if this fills up with water, or if this leaks? I'm going to jump ahead. Well, I'm kind of jumping ahead here in my talk, but I'll spoil the punchline here. I'll go over to this picture. There's a storm drain. These are those same waste bins, the same picture. There's a storm drain right next to it. So if it rains and it leaks, it's going and carrying that stuff all the way off in that storm drain. And similar, the one right next to it has old electrical poles, which usually will have an oil or some other type of solvent sealer on them. And those will also leak and shed in rain. And if the bin isn't properly contained or covered, that'll also carry pollutants off into that storm drain. So this was an inspection we did right before it was going to rain. We were looking for non-stormwater discharges. And so this was something we were talking to them about. Hey, at the very least, throw some tarps over there before it rains, because that's going to run off into that storm drain. There's going to be nothing we can do about it. All right, so some don'ts. Don't place oily parts and debris in bins if they don't belong there. That transformer, I don't think, belonged in that recycling can. And we talked to the facility manager about that, and they got that removed. But the liquid was still in there, and that had to be cleaned up separately from that. So don't empty liquids into trash and recycling bins because they will leak out. I have another picture a little bit, or maybe it's in my next workshop, of a leaking trash can, and it's going right into a storm drain. They do leak. And don't store bins that have potential to leak near the MS4 conveyance system. So that was the other thing we were recommending. Should probably move these recycling bins away from this drain inlet so that it's not running off directly into the inlet. This is literally like 5 feet away from it. So that's it's one of the more difficult BMPs to implement. Maybe it might be the one that's harder to address, maybe more costly or time consuming to take care of, but it is very vital because a lot of things can end up in waste bins and they can carry a lot of pollutants, and it might not be very visible what pollutants are in there. So cover waste bins is the main takeaway there. All right, what about material storage? I promised you talking about the secondary containment, and I love this picture. I should have blown it up. If you can see it, the barrels on the left here, they're on secondary containment. They're actually strapped down so they can't spill off of this spill pallet. And the ones on the right of it, the spill pallet is on top of the barrels that are just on the ground. So that's not how secondary containment is supposed to be. The secondary containment is supposed to be under the barrels. So again, common sense. We need to use common sense in this and make sure that if we do have BMPs out, we're actually using them. So not to harp on them, it happens. They were just putting them out and forgot about it. So it was a quick, easy fix, put the spill pallet on the ground, move the barrels, and everything was all good. So what are the do's and don'ts here? Well, do routinely check labels to make sure they're in good condition. Because again, it's very important to know what a pollutant is. And maybe you don't generate waste as quickly as an industrial or commercial facility, and the label deteriorates and just goes away. We don't know what's in there anymore, and everybody forgot. So make sure everything is still clearly labeled, and that things are being disposed of within your time frame if it's hazardous waste. Ensure containers are kept in secondary containment when not in use. Again, it does get forgotten about, so make sure that it's being used. And do check for leaks or spills and clean up as soon as possible. So that's another common theme rolling through these BMPs is visual observations, checking and then doing something about it if you see something. You can see on the right here is a good example. This is probably an oversized spill containment, but they have a few things in here. They have a, it looks like a sprayer in there, which I don't know if that's supposed to be in there. And then a couple of miscellaneous 5-gallon buckets. So it's probably big enough to hold if anything spills in here. And then they actually have another little containment method here to make sure that if anything does spill out of it or if a bucket leaks, it's contained. So that is a good containment and it's undercover. So good BMPs there. All right, let's talk about some in the field BMPs. So road and parking lot maintenance dues. And this is a big BMP category. SC 70 is the CASCA cut sheet that I'm talking about here. This covers a lot of activities. So we're not talking about a lot of the different activities that could be covered under this, but the BMPs are all fairly similar. They're similar in the idea. And this is the main idea is if you have runoff from your activity, or if there's a potential for things to leave the area that you're working in, berm the work area, provide some perimeter control, or protect a drain inlet downstream. On the left here is a good example of that. We have a couple of pollutants over here. They're doing a water line replacement on this picture. And so they've just finished refilling their trench. So they have sediment all over the place. They're now putting asphalt down. They're doing this in the middle of winter. And so they definitely need to have provided a berm for this work area. Now, there are some challenges because they did need to have traffic still coming through here. So this was an interesting project where they really needed to provide some, what's the word I'm looking for here? Innovative BMPs over the traditional ideas of what a containment or a berm might be. But this is always a challenge is maintaining in the right of way when you have to keep traffic flowing. How do we berm, the work area? So if that is possible, if runoff is a potential, we need to berm that area. And in the second picture here, it's from that same project, it's a little different time frame. They had a hole that they had cut to do their tie-in that filled up with water. And so now they need to dewater it, but there's sediment involved in there. So what they thought is, oh, we'll just put a sump pump in there and drain it off into the storm drain. Well, it's potable water, but now it's taking a load of sediment. And so it's very hard to see in this picture. And I lost the inverted one where it's actually going into the drain, but it was chocolate milk going from this pump into a drain that was 10 feet away. No berm, no containment. They could have at least tried to add something, a little settling area for the sediment. They didn't do anything. And that was a stop work day. That was an interesting day. So the next item, do protect storm drains when performing work involving potential pollutants, because it'll really save you from headaches in the future. Again, a couple of rock bags or sandbags around that drain, they may not have had as big of a problem as they did have. And another thing that often gets forgotten about is vacuuming and cleaning up saw-cut slurry. This is something that can run off and reach a storm drain, and it does carry pollutants, and it can raise pH sometimes, and also have very fine particles that could also be the same as sediment going into the stormwater system. So vacuuming up, containing saw-cut slurry, disposing of it properly is what we're looking for there. Some don'ts. What are some don'ts here? So don't store materials that could spill or cause pollutants or pollution in the street and gutters. And that would be transporting buckets of material or barrels of material on the backhoe without strapping them down, right? And they hit a bump and everything spills out and they run over it and splat everything out. That's happened. I've seen that happen in the field. And don't store something on the back of your truck and then take off like a banshee and then have it spill off the back of your truck. I've seen that happen too, actually right in front of me. A diesel can, five-gallon diesel can on the back of somebody's truck. They left, diesel can fell off, spilled, and reached the storm drain. So really watch your materials, watch where you're storing them, and make sure that they are prevented from spilling if possible. Don't use water unless storm drains have been bermed or protected, or the potential for pollutants has been removed. And then don't leave soil disturbed to stormwater when possible. We want to be practicing what we preach, and so we want to be covering our disturbed soil if it's going to be raining, like what we have to tell our construction sites. All right, moving right along. What about right-of-way or landscape maintenance? This comes from the cut sheet SC 73. And this, I've kind of talked about this a little bit already, about the pyrethroid and pesticide application. And so the main takeaway from the BMP cut sheet, the main takeaway from our permit requirements and the new pyrethroid requirements is the message is don't apply chemical controls first. Use mechanical controls, use whatever you can, blankets, weed control mats, or other actual pest control devices. Reach for those items first before applying chemicals. Don't leave grass clippings or leaves in the street. So in that earlier picture I showed with all those grass clippings or leaf clippings and trimmings, guys did come back and clean that up at the end of the day, but sometimes they get forgotten about. A lot of other contractors just blow them off into the street or blow them off into the neighboring field. I used to do landscaping for a living, and we did that a lot, unfortunately. And that's not what we're supposed to do. When I found out we weren't supposed to blow stuff into the storm drain, I was sorely ashamed. So don't leave it in the street, but sweep it up, blow it back onto the lawn. Another common sense one, don't mix chemicals or load fertilizers in the street or nearby storm drains. Try to do it out of the way, or berm a storm drain if you're right next to it, just in case something spills or leaks. It does happen. So what are some do's? do leave grass clippings and leaves on the lawn to mulch them. That's a really good practice. A lot of municipalities actually do practice that. Some people call it grass cycling. Other people just call it mulching. But it reduces the waste you have, and if you just blow things back on the lawn, you don't have it in the street as a potential pollutant. And then also do implement integrated pest management techniques, procedures for pest problems. All right, so that's some of our permittee staff BMPs. What about contractors? What about them? So for Bmp expectations for contractors, I think I said this already, but we need to make sure contractually they're obligated to follow BMPs, and then need to tell them about it, because you know, how many people actually read the terms and conditions of a contract all the way through, except for lawyers? So if you just have that in there as a little blurb saying, oh, you will agree to do this, don't just, you know, trust that they've read it and have agreed to it. You know, verbally verify that they understand and will implement these procedures and what's expected of them. Walk the job with them, show them the potential pollutant areas and things like that, and what to be aware of. Have facility signage, no dumping on waste bins. You know, have no dumping signs or what can be dumped and allowed to be put in there. And then do job inspections, quarterly inspections, implementing those O&M BMP inspections as we are required to. All right. And so I mentioned before, a big sticking point in the CASCA BMP cut sheets is spill response. And I'm going to quickly cover this before our time is up here. So this comes from, I didn't write down the number that it came from, but you can look it up in the BMP handbook yourself. Spill prevention and control, I think it's SC 11. And this comes from there. These are the steps that CASCA recommends for small non-hazardous spills. Use a rag, a damp cloth, or absorbent materials for small spills of liquid that's non-hazardous. You can use a broom or shovel for general cleanup of dry materials. If you do use water, you need to collect and properly dispose of it. You can't just dump it down the sink unless it goes to the sanitary sewer. The main point here is don't dispose of wash water down the storm drain. Just because it has water, or it might be, a common misconception is it's water-based. It's not still allowed to go down the storm drain. We just have a blanket statement, only rain down the drain. So dispose of waste materials properly. Again, if it's a hazardous waste, you want to dispose of that properly. And clean and dispose of any equipment used to clean up the spill properly. That's the idea here. Again, common sense. Some other things is identify the personnel and train employees on spill response. So you have like a point person who knows this in and out. And then again, store and maintain appropriate spill cleanup materials in clearly marked areas. Make sure people know where to find them. And then locate them in an area that they are readily accessible. Don't have them up the stairs in a closet behind a locked door. Have them in some readily accessible areas with good signage so that they can be grabbed and taken out right when they need it. In a warehouse, on a truck, readily accessible. That's the idea. For larger spills, these are all the same steps. Really nothing different. Whoops, I went too far there. Nothing different from the small spills. The only thing I would add onto this is if you can, if it's safe to do so, block a nearby storm drain if you have a larger spill, because that's probably going to be your better first step, is going to the storm drain, blocking it, or putting booms to contain a spill if it's a larger spill. You would follow all the same steps for the cleanup of it. Use absorbent materials. Probably don't want to use rags. That's going to generate a lot of waste. So use absorbent. Really work your broom in there to pick up oily debris or other liquids. But all the same steps of proper disposal and those types of things that we're hitting on. But the main point I want to hit here is if it's safe to do so, block a nearby storm drain inlet or burn the runoff area so that it's not increasing or continuing to travel. If that's safe to do so, if you can do that first. Now, for hazardous materials, or very large spills that actually do discharge, sometimes we might need to contract with a private cleanup company. A lot of municipalities have VACCON trucks readily available to them, so they can go in and suck out the storm drain if need be themselves, or block things off. But sometimes you do need to have a hazmat response unit, depending on the type of material that may have been spilled. So the point here again, is having training, having a book, a spill response plan, so people can look for hazardous or very bad spills. Who do we call? 911 is probably going to be your best bet, saying, hey, we had a massive spill of this material, it's hazardous, we need somebody to help clean this up. So if you are unfamiliar with your spill response plan, you don't know where it's located, again, homework, go find that, go look it up. And then anything that's used to clean up hazardous materials has to be disposed of as hazardous waste. It cannot be just thrown away as regular waste. It has to be disposed as hazardous waste. All right, so that wraps up about what I had for everybody. Just some review again. As we approach your facility or your operation or job, I hope this is helpful for you. The WIC acronym or acrostic, just thinking through these 4 steps. What's going on in the facility at the site? Is there potential for pollutants coming from these operations? Can they be transported, wind, water, or a spill? And then where's it going to go? Know where it's going to end up. WIC. There you go. I hope that's helpful. For Bmp Guidance, again, just to quickly restate this, CASCA, super helpful resource. Their Bmp handbook is available free of charge on their website. Go on there, download it, and check that out. Also, the Center for Watershed Protection's Municipal Prevention and Good Housekeeping Practices Manual 9. That's also a good resource to grab as well. So with that, we have some questions, and I have 2, Rebecca, that I'm going to answer here. Let me know if you have any more.
There's 2 that came to me as well.
Cool. And my contact information is on there. If you want to just write that down, email me or give me a call a little bit later, be happy to talk with you, answer some questions one-on-one. We have a saying here in our office, advice is free over coffee. So with that, let's go ahead and look at these questions. Garrick, I hope that's how I pronounce your name, asks, what's the best way to cover roll-off bins that don't have lids? I usually recommend tarps, but as those can be problematic as well, especially when removing the tarp during or after rain event. That's a good idea. Or a good point is that if it rains and you have a tarp over your bin, you might have a tarp that's has a puddle on it right on top of the bin, and that might still spill into your waste bin. That's a great point, a great observation. A lot of waste companies, at least where I work or where I work in across the Central Valley, they offer a lot more bins with lids, either a lid, an actual metal lid that goes on top of it and can easily slide on and off, or a rolling lid that will sheet the water off. There's also different devices that are made that you can take off and put on as yourself, kind of like for what we see on trailers, like dump trailers, where they'll have that big tarp that you can roll out and then roll it back. So there are a few options. I don't have any brands in mind, but if you think about it, shoot me an email and we can ask about that. We can talk about that later. Another question here is secondary containment required to have 100% capacity? I don't know that offhand, and at least for municipal permit requirements, not as far as I know. Generally, what it's a good idea is to have greater than 100% capacity, because one of the pictures I showed, it had 4 barrels on a single pallet. They call it a spill pallet. So if all 4 of those were to break or to leak, it should have adequate containment for those 4 barrels, or at least 2 of those, I think is the standard, at least 2 of those, and then some rain, a certain amount of rain on top of that so it doesn't overflow. So it's a good idea to have 100% capacity on it if you can do that. But I believe a lot of the stuff like you would get from New Pig or something like that, they at least have 50% capacity plus a little bit of freeboard in case of rain, I think is kind of how it goes. Not as familiar on that, but that's what I know. And I have another comment here, 110% capacity of the largest volume container. Thank you, Keith, for helping me fill in the gap in knowledge. Rebecca.
And two of the questions that came in earlier are hand in hand. The first question is, which CASCA certification can be used for working on MS4 permits? And the second one is, does the QISP certification allow me to consult for or work for MS4 permitted systems?
Those are great questions. I believe you said CASCA certification in that first question. Is that right,
yes.
Rebecca? Okay. So there is not a CASCA certification. There is another organization. It's a national organization called EnviroCert. They do have a municipal certification. A lot of the smaller MS4s don't require that for consulting with them. At least I haven't run across that. I think some of the larger ones, maybe a phase one that's a bit bigger or more complex system, they would definitely want to see that certification because it's a bit more in depth of their program up there. I don't remember the acronym off my hand, but EnviroCert is the organization that you'll want to look through. The QISP, I don't think you need that for anything to do with the MS4 permit. That is specifically for the industrial general permit. What is required for the municipalities is a QSD license if you are reviewing erosion sediment control plans for the municipality, and then a QSP license if you're performing construction inspections for the municipality. And then if you work for the municipality, you need to be certified or work with somebody who is certified with both those certifications. So great questions. We finished right at 2. Thank you everybody for joining us. I think I'm going to see a lot of you guys in our next workshop on illicit discharges at 2:30. So looking forward to having you back. Thanks for participating.
Thank you all. Hope you join us for the next workshop.